At the time of this video's release, one of the largest annual mass movements of humans has just finished up, and millions of people are now returning to their homes after taking part in an ancient tradition that predates the religion is a part of, the Hajj. The pilgrimage to Mecca, aka the Hajj, is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, and it's required to be undertaken by every Muslim if they are financially able and physically healthy enough to do it. And today, we're going to learn about it. Quick disclaimer before we begin. I don't speak Arabic, so I'm going to butcher pronunciation at some point in this video, and I am sorry in advance. So, as I just mentioned, the Hajj is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. These pillars are basically practices/duties that Muslims are required to do by religious law. I'll run through the other 4 wicked fast. Number 1. Shahada, aka the profession of faith. Muslims are to declare that there is only one God, and Muhammad is the final prophet of said God. Number 2. Salat, aka prayer. Muslims are required to pray 5 times a day. Once at dawn, once at noon, once at mid-afternoon, once at dusk, and once at sunset. And they are supposed to pray facing the direction of Mecca. Number 3. Zakat, aka almsgiving. Muslims are required to donate a portion of their income to charity and to help those in need every year. And number 4. Swam, aka fasting. During the month of Ramadan, healthy Muslims are supposed to fast between sunrise and sunset to remind themselves of how lucky they are to have blessings from God. And finally, the subject of this video, the 5th pillar, is the Hajj, aka pilgrimage. At the end of the Islamic year, all Muslims who are healthy and have the financial means are required to make the Hajj to Mecca and to perform the activities of the Hajj, and they are required to do this at least once in their life. Now, before we talk about the rituals of the Hajj, we should learn about how the Hajj started. But that's actually a harder question to answer than you'd think. Our written sources for the Hajj almost exclusively come from the Islamic era and give the Muslim origin for the Hajj. But that's a slight problem for secular historians, because there's one thing all scholars can agree on. The Hajj predates Islam. Now, to some devout Muslims, something predating Islam is an oxymoron, because according to Islam, the first human, Adam, was a Muslim, so nothing should predate Islam. If you are a Muslim who believes that Adam was the first Muslim, that's completely fine and allowable. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to operate on the idea that Islam began with Muhammad's preachings. And if we use that as our qualifier, pilgrimage to Mecca definitely predates Muhammad, and by extension, Islam. Even before Muhammad's birth, Mecca was an important trade area on the oceanic portion of the Silk Road, linking land caravans between the Mediterranean world and the Indian Ocean. In Mecca stood the Kaaba, which Muslims believe was a stone that fell from paradise. The Kaaba still stands in Mecca to this day, and it is what all Muslims are aiming towards when they pray. Because of its position on such a lucrative trade route, people have been passing through Mecca for thousands of years. And as time went on, the city grew. As the city got larger, people started bringing their gods with them as they moved to Mecca, and before long, all the gods ended up inside the Kaaba. Mecca went from an economic center of the region to a religious center as well, and people started going on pilgrimage for their own religious reasons. These gods were signified by statues, and they stayed in the Kaaba until Muhammad personally threw them out when he took control of Mecca. But I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's backtrack a little. According to the Islamic origins of the Hajj, Mecca was always important because of the story of Ibrahim. That's the Islamic name for Abraham from Judaism and Christianity. For those unfamiliar with the story of Abraham, he was a man who made a deal with the one true God. God promised Abraham a son, and he had Ishmael with his wife's servant Hagar, or Hajira in Islam. But they were eventually cast out into the desert. And in the Tanakh/Old Testament, that's the last mention we get of Ishmael and Hagar. But in the Quran, that's where their story continues. In the Quran, specifically the 2nd surah, Ismail, which is the Islamic name for Ishmael, and Hajira are joined by Ibrahim as they journey down to where Mecca would be. God calls Ibrahim to leave his wife and infant son, which he does, leaving them stranded in the desert. Hajira runs between 2 hills, screaming and begging God for help, before eventually returning to Ismail. When she gets to the baby, she sees spring water bubbling from underneath him, and she builds a well around it and thanks God for his blessings. Later, Ibrahim returns to his family, and God declares Ibrahim the first Imam. With this new authority, and with the help of a more grown-up Ismail, the two build the Kaaba and declare it the house of God on earth. Ibrahim circles the Kaaba 7 times and then declares Mecca a holy city. Some undetermined time after the death of Ismail, the Kaaba fell into pagan hands, and it became a place of worship for idols. And it's just after this is where secular history and Islamic tradition match up. By this point, the Kaaba wouldn't become a place of monotheistic worship until the rise of Muhammad in 692 CE. Now that we got the possible origins for the Hajj out of the way, what exactly happens when someone is on Hajj? Well, first of all, only Muslims are allowed to go on the Hajj. This is not only because it's a Muslim's duty, but also because Mecca is off limits to non-Muslims. The Saudi government does issue Hajj visas for people in other countries based on the Muslim populations of said countries, while other governments like Malaysia even subsidize people's trips if they cannot afford to go on Hajj themselves. Once a Muslim has their visa situation sorted out, they deal with the other travel expenses and then wait for the last month of the Islamic calendar, Dhul Ahijjah. I am so sorry. The people who go on Hajj are called pilgrims, and the pilgrimage they go on lasts 5 days, from the 8th to the 13th of the final month in the Islamic calendar. Once they arrive in Mecca or in one of the surrounding towns, they have the option to do some sightseeing before the Hajj officially begins. The Hajj starts with people entering a spiritual state of purity called Ihram. Everybody dons white robes to signify purity and equality before God. The people then circle the Kaaba 7 times. This is called a tawaf, just as Muhammad did during the one Hajj he made during his lifetime, and as Ibrahim is said to have done. The second day of the Hajj has a reenactment of the story I told earlier, where Hajira was abandoned by Ibrahim and she ran between hills begging for help. People run between the hills Safra and Marwa 7 times, all while they pray before, during, and after the event. On the third day, pilgrims go to the fields of Arafat and pray. This is considered the most important part of the Hajj, and it cannot be missed for any reasons except medical emergencies. But even if you do have a medical emergency, you are required to make it up when you are physically able to. Arafat is believed to be where Adam and Eve reunited after banishment from paradise, and it's where Muhammad delivered his final sermon, completing Islam. Pilgrims spend all day at this site, and during the night they gather pebbles and rocks to prepare for the next day. The next duty involves the reenactment of another story, this one of Ibrahim. In this story, Ibrahim is told by God to sacrifice his son, which Ibrahim prepares himself to do. On the way to the sacrifice spot, Iblis, aka Satan, tries to stop Ibrahim and tempts him to disobey God. Ibrahim ignores this, but eventually starts chucking rocks at Iblis to make him go away, which Iblis eventually does. They arrive at the spot, but before Ibrahim can sacrifice Ismail, God intervenes and stops Ibrahim from committing a human sacrifice of his son, just like in the Old Testament with Isaac. Pilgrims honor this event by throwing stones at massive pillars. It's meant to symbolize casting away Iblis and sin from their own lives. Pilgrims can also pay to have an animal sacrificed in their name, and the sacrificed meat will be donated to the poor. This stoning is reenacted on the 4th and 5th days of the Hajj. The day then concludes with people circling the Kaaba in a tawaf prayer once again. And with that, the Hajj is complete, and people can return home. And although this isn't technically part of the Hajj, some people do go to Medina to visit the grave of Muhammad. They either do this before or after the Hajj, as a bonus to the pilgrimage experience. Now, before I go, I want to leave you with something important. This year, thousands of people who wanted to go on Hajj can't because their lives are being destroyed by violence. Gaza has been wrecked by Israeli forces, and despite constant pleas for ceasefire, the violence continues. Put aside your political opinions and consider that these are human beings who are having their lives, their homes, and their people shattered by senseless violence and terror. Forget wanting to go on Hajj. These people just want to live. There's a link in the description and in the pinned comment to support Palestine. The money will go towards helping people survive. And if you have any money to spare, please consider donating. I want to thank you all for watching. If you have gone on the Hajj, then I hope you had a great time and would love to hear you share your experience in the comments below. If you haven't gone on Hajj but plan to do so someday, then I hope God accepts your Hajj. And until next time, have a good one.